Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev had to justify himself to Donald Trump after the American president rebuked the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council over the issue of nuclear weapons. Let me briefly remind you of the essence of this conflict on social media. Dmitry Medvedev, in his usual manner, warned that other countries could help Iran with its nuclear program. Of course, Medvedev's statement was primarily aimed at the Russian audience, which might be puzzled as to why such a strong, self-assured Russia is not defending its allies when the United States and Israel are destroying Iran's nuclear potential. In response, Donald Trump advised Medvedev not to play with the word nuclear and described his statement as irresponsible. Let us recall, however, that Putin does not make such statements, and that is probably why he remains the leading figure in the Russian state. In response, Medvedev began to defend himself to Trump, insisting that he had not made any statements about the possible transfer of nuclear weapons to Iran by Russia, and this once again demonstrated a situation in which the Russian leadership, as they say, cannot take a hit. Medvedev showed that his entire position deflates as soon as it is noticed, because it is obvious that the former president of the Russian Federation himself, or the people who write social media posts on his behalf, did not expect such a reaction from Donald Trump. They probably did not expect that the president of the United States would even notice the statements of the former president of Russia. But Trump did notice and reminded everyone that such statements are unacceptable. And as we can see, no one in the Kremlin tried to argue with him. The press service of the Russian president, specifically representatives of this institution who write all of Medvedev's brash messages, decided to adjust the position of the former president of the Russian Federation. And this once again shows that street tags are just that, street tags. As long as no one pays attention to its behavior, it can belt out drunken songs from night till morning, offend the neighbors, and brag about its impunity. But as soon as law enforcement officers arrive in the yard, or let's say another group of tougher street thugs shows up, these recent troublemakers suddenly turn into model members of society, claiming they never threatened anyone and that anything perceived as a threat was merely a quote from classic literature which they were rehearsing in order to put on a play for the neighbors. Dmitry Medvedev behaved in exactly the same way, or, to be more precise, the image of Dmitry Medvedev on social media. Because it's clear that the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council himself doesn't actually write anything. But his image is used by the Kremlin to intimidate the entire surrounding world. I want to remind you that it is Medvedev who constantly makes nuclear threats. And it's obvious why the function of the former president of the Russian Federation is to intimidate the West and remind them of Russia's nuclear threat. In other words, essentially to restrain Western countries when it comes to helping Ukraine to do everything possible so that Western leaders understand providing intensive military support to Kyiv in its confrontation with Moscow could lead to a real nuclear war. And as we can see, these threats often work quite effectively. And the West is rather cautious in its military support for Ukraine because it fears the unpredictability of the Russian political leadership. And Donald Trump, probably without even expecting such a result himself, demonstrated that in reality, the Kremlin does not know how to withstand pressure, does not want to, and has no intention of doing so. That the Medvedevs of all political stripes, who, as we can clearly see, also significantly lack the necessary and crucial cards, can only truly act like aggressive bullies until they are firmly reminded of their actual and true political role. By the way, it's worth noting that in this whole Iranian story, Russia once again demonstrated that its claims to the status of a global power are, to put it mildly, exaggerated. Medvedev made his bold statements on the very day when Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was in the Russian capital meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And during this context, we could once again see that Russia has no intention of helping its ally or taking any decisive actions that could stop the United States and Israel from striking Iran's nuclear capability. Moreover, in Moscow, they even tried to justify why they were not going to help Iran. They showed on television the text of the agreement between the Russian Federation and Iran on strategic partnership, which does not imply that Russia would intervene in a war if Iran is subjected to aggression, but demands that Russia not assist the aggressor attacking that state. In short, just excuses upon excuses. And the fact that Russia has neither the desire nor the capability to help its allies has once again become obvious. And this is after the fall of the pro-Russian regime of the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. At that time, by the way, neither Tehran nor Moscow was able to help it. And yet, Assad's regime was also considered one of the most important for the Russian Federation. After all, he guaranteed the Kremlin access to military bases on Syrian territory, which also remained a rather important element in the Russian Federation's confrontation with the civilized world. But neither could they help Assad in Moscow nor Ayatollah Khomeini. And instead of providing any real support, they decided to limit themselves to Medvedev's swaggering statements, hinting that even if Iran is forced to give up its own nuclear potential and its own enriched uranium, Russia could help it with a bomb at any moment. And as we can see, this is exactly what infuriated Trump, who believes that his actions have put an end to Iran's nuclear program. And as we can see, Trump's irritation led to Medvedev's attempts to justify himself, not only because perhaps Russia doesn't really want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. There's also the question of the adequacy of the Russian political leadership itself. But above all, it's because the Kremlin doesn't want to quarrel with Donald Trump and understands the real weight classes of both itself and the United States. Of course, it would be good if Donald Trump himself understood these weight classes and their differences. If he realized that he's not dealing with any serious people but with street thugs, he would realize that it's actually Vladimir Putin himself, speaking through Dmitry Medvedev's voice, just in a different guise, hiding behind the curtain, and that Putin is the same kind of street thug. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, follow me on my social media and on my Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee and Donatello channels, which help support and develop these resources. Make use of the S function right here on YouTube. Peace to you all.